All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here around 2024 Week 1 season opening prediction and preview for Miami versus Florida, a major non-conference game going down in Gainesville at 3:30 Eastern Time on ESPN. 53.5 over/under. Miami 2-point favorites in this one. Looking at the Miami side of the ball in terms of offense, Nick, this is a team that's incredibly revamped. They brought in two high-profile transfers, Cam Ward, Damian Martinez, who we both thought would be great fits from the beginning. We'll start with Cam Ward, a guy who was very good for Washington State. This is a guy I certainly want to see regain his confidence as he was playing behind a very poor offensive line. That certainly led to him, having poor showings, at times. A player that does have good natural arm talent, though. Good ball handler, has a quick release. Pretty creative player as well. I think he's, got some, abilities to be clutch as well. Cam Ward, a very good ball player. Obviously, he flirted with the NFL draft for a little bit. No one actually believed him, but it certainly, I think, worked in terms of getting a little bit more of a paycheck, Nick. And this is a guy who played pretty good last year in Autzen and Husky stadiums, as road contests. How will he handle this environment with a better supporting cast? Seems like the writing is on the wall for Ward to have a very successful debut, Nick. And much respect to those road environments. It's nothing like, the Gators won down in Gainesville.
Certainly one of the toughest places to play in the nation is in Gainesville, Florida. A very tough spot. But when you bring in two new strong pieces on the offense between Cam Ward and Damian Martinez, this is a really strong offense that this team could really be effective with. Martinez was phenomenal at Oregon State, Super Bulldog weekend participant who ends up committing to Miami. I think he's a great fit for this offense, while Cam Ward I think is an incredible fit for this offense. He flirted the NFL draft, didn't end up doing that. We saw him succeed at Incarnate Ward. We saw him succeed at Washington State as well. Yes, it was a little rough at times at Washington State. It certainly was part of the reason he had a weak offensive line, got roughed up a little bit. We'll have a better unit certainly here at Miami. Going on the road in a tough environment, we've seen this before where good quarterbacks go on the road and struggle in that stadium in the Swamp. It's one of the loudest stadiums in the country, very tough place to play. I've been there before, really couldn't even hear myself think there, and I was in the upper deck. I can't imagine it's much better on the field itself. A very tough spot, but a great spot to earn your stripes if you're Cam Ward.
And, of course, the receiving group he has to work with is a very good one. I think the trio they have here, facing a secondary that was one of the worst nationally in terms of allowing big plays. So you're certainly keying in on those matchups. You start with Xavier Restrepo. I think this guy's going to have, maybe 15 targets in this contest in terms of, props or daily fantasy. Go ahead and bet the over on this guy. Strong-handed pass catcher, has short area quickness, a really good route runner. Restrepo is going to be a focal point this year. Jacoby George, a guy who's good yards after catch abilities. He's a downfield playmaker, but he can make waves in that quick game. And then Samuel Brown from Houston, a guy who's also a very good route runner, has a knack for finding open space against zone. You have a pretty deep room as well. Isaiah Horton is a guy that has some physicality. Ray Joseph is a guy that might get on the field this year. More of a speed guy there. This is a good supporting cast, Nick. I think the one at Washington State was good, but it certainly doesn't, reach the top like the Hurricanes do. I think this is certainly one of the better groups in the country in terms of pass catchers. What do you make of the matchup here? Because, again, Florida was bad at allowing big plays, but I think, when we talk about the Florida secondary, I'm going to give them plenty of praise as well for the upcoming season. So this is going to be a fun matchup to watch and see who comes out on top.
This is certainly an interesting matchup. I really do like what this wide receiving group is right now for Miami. I think they've added and returned enough pieces. Xavier Restrepo, obviously, you know what he's going to do. He's an incredibly talented player that returns. He had a really strong season last year, was a key piece of this offense. And when you bring him back, that's solid. Over 1,000 yards receiving, 6 touchdowns, 12.8 yards per grab for Restrepo. I'm excited to see him back. Samuel Brown was a solid add. Jacoby George returning him is not bad. Ray Joseph was a younger player who got some reps last year. So I really like what they have on offense here for Miami. This is a very deep wide receiving room. And now you plug in a quarterback who is a really strong quarterback, can air it out, can hit you with the deep ball. Looks to be a solid matchup.
Now you look at this run game. Obviously, Cristobal has always had his offenses built around physicality in the run game. That's why I thought Martinez would be a perfect fit. And this is a guy who was good burst into the hole, good vision in the open field, really thrives on outside zone runs. Him and Mark Fletcher, this is a lot of physicality they're bringing to the table. 216 and then 225 pounds respectively, as Fletcher's a very physical back. A.J. Allen a bit smaller, but he certainly can bring some of those characteristics to the table as well. You look at the offensive line, because I think it goes hand in hand, Nick, as we shift to that part of the offense, because at tackle, I think they're good. Jalen Rivers, Francis Mauigoa, entering his true sophomore season, is expected to make big leaps this year. Inez Cooper was a good pass blocker, but struggled in the run game. Zach Carpenter, a transfer, less than ideal at Indiana, and Samson Unkalola, another 5-star, finally going to be able to get on the field this year as a redshirt freshman. If you're keying in on a mismatch maybe for the Hurricanes, it would be this interior offensive line, Nick. I think they have a high ceiling, and I think they'll progress greatly throughout the year. But this is an area where the Florida Gators, who have a big physical defensive line they've really recruited, might be able to match up quite well, and that would allow them to slow down this run game, which is going to be the bread and butter you would assume for Miami.
Miami's going to look to ground and pound in this game, control the tempo, run the ball as effectively as possible. I think this is a really solid offensive line with some really key pieces. Francis Muwago is an incredibly talented player at right tackle. With the really solid running back room they have, featuring Damian Martinez and Mark Fletcher as the two headliners, they're going to want to run the ball a whole lot here, but I think the matchup is beneficial for Florida. I think Florida has an opportunity to dominate with this defensive line unit. It's a really good unit. I like what Miami has in the offensive line, but in a tough environment where penalties are probably going to happen a fair amount, plus just be a little bit rattled, a little tough to get set, I think this Florida defensive line will have a very strong day.
Now you move to the Florida offense, a unit that really shocked a lot of people last season, mainly Graham Mertz, a guy that we felt wasn't in the greatest of systems at Wisconsin, really showcased his talent. But last year I didn't think he would do what he did, and now he's showcasing good movement out of the pocket, accurate throws on the run, downfield touch. This is a guy who did a great job layering the ball in the middle of the field. Didn't have many interceptions. Of course, DJ Lagaway, a 5-star recruit, he might get involved at some point in this game. So I think at quarterback, this is a fun little mismatch they might be able to provide. And you look at, the revamped wide receiver room that they have also bringing to the table. Shamari Dyke coming over from Wisconsin. I think he was, a player that also kind of suffered in a poor system. Eugene Wilson, I think he's going to be a top 10 wide receiver this year, Nick. This is a very good player, very explosive with the ball in his hands. They use him on jet sweeps. He has quick feet. The great first step really allows him to thrive off his release. Very good on quick slants. And, of course, Elijah Badger, a guy who was, I thought, a very good player for Arizona State. A guy who has good speed underneath, who can really create space vertically. This is a wide receiver room last year that wasn't all that great, and they've gotten better this past season. Of course, Ricky Pearsall departing is unfortunate, but they had another breakout player at tight end, Arliss Boardingham, as well. Quail Jackson, I think, has been impressive at times. This is a much improved wide receiver room, Nick, and that includes guys like Aiden Mizell and Andy Jean, who have plenty of speed. They didn't play much last year. A lot of versatility the Gators have with a quarterback who broke out last season. I'm very excited for what they might provide here.
I'm extremely excited for this offense. I think this offense has a lot of fun pieces. And Graham Mertz, can he live up to continuing those expectations that he's built for himself last year? The expectations were low for Mertz coming into last year, but nearly 3,000 yards passing, 72% comp rate, 20 touchdowns, 3 picks was a phenomenal season for the guy who really was being cast off, being clowned for making the move to Florida. People said, oh, what's Florida doing? This guy's not good. And I think, the system was certainly holding him back at Wisconsin, but he definitely shocked me of some of his capabilities he was able to pull out and be a really strong star in the SEC, a surprisingly good player that was very fun and exciting to watch last year. And now he brings in some pieces and returns some pieces that could be really solid for him on offense. I think Eugene Wilson, as a sophomore, is an incredible player to keep an eye on. 538 yards receiving, 6 scores for him last year. A really physical, talented wide receiver. Really like what he can do. Shamir Dyke, I think, is an incredible add out of the portal. Elijah Badger, underrated add as well. Marcus Burks, Khalil Jackson, 2 solid pieces, plus having decent tight ends play with Hayden Hansen and Arliss Boardingham. I like what this offense can do through the air. I think this offense has a lot of solid pieces, and they're going to try and attack this Canes secondary early on and put some big chunk plays on the board, get the momentum going, get the crowd on their side.
Now you look at a rushing offense that, was good in games. Against LSU and Missouri, they were great, but they also had outliers like, less than 100 yards against Kentucky and South Carolina. When they played Charlotte, for example, they weren't all that great either. And against Utah, they only had 13 yards. So this run game was certainly up and down. They also, had a massive game against an FCS opponent. So again, they were just, all kinds of different shades. Montreal Johnson, obviously a very good player, likely to play in this contest. We're not sure if he's going to be 100%, though. A very physical player that can rip off long runs, has good backside vision. This is an important player for them. I think he's going to play, Nick. Doesn't look like he's going to be 100%, though. Trayon Webb, Jaden Baugh, very young players. They're, very talented. We've been critical of this room and their depth because they just don't have that experience. We never, criticized the talent, and Florida fans thought we were doing so. Not at all. We just think that the experience is a factor here, and that could be a problem. Maybe not in pure running, but in terms of, blocking or, assignments as a check down in the passing game, Nick. Those things can certainly hurt you, and that could be bad for this offense. So if those backs and Webb and Baugh and whoever get on the field, they have to be very sound in that regard. And I think playing at home is going to be a big factor, for these running backs.
I like Montreal Johnson a lot. He's a player I was very high on when he transferred over from Louisiana. to play for this program following his head coach. I thought he was a really solid player, just hasn't quite hit the level I was hoping for yet. Obviously he's a little unhealthy right now, battling an injury. If he can be fully healthy, that's a huge player to have in their backfield and a guy that can dominate. I think Webb's not a bad number 2 option. But is he ready for that prime time, huge matchup against a massive Canes defense? That's certainly tough to look at. I think this is going to be a tough running matchup, but I do think these players are good. If Johnson is fully healthy and ready to go by Saturday, I think he can be a massive game changer here. Definitely a tough matchup because this is a phenomenal Canes defensive line we'll get to in a little bit. Definitely looks like that if Florida's going to win this game, they're going to have to do it through the air.
And this offensive line will have to be good regardless against a very good Miami front. Austin Barmer, very good left tackle. Certainly didn't have the best of seasons last year. Very good player for them, though. Brendan Crenshaw-Dixon from San Diego State transfers in to be the right tackle. Excited to see how he performs. I think the interior, Jake Slaughter, very impressive center for them. Kanaja Harris, a guy that I think has tremendous upside. He's really good in power gap scheme runs. And then Damian George, who struggled at tackle. He moves inside to a more natural position with his power at 6'6", 350. I think he'll be an asset in outside zone run plays. So, we're talking about the Miami offensive line, and I think the one for Florida is just as exciting, Nick, because I want to see how these guys can be as a cohesive unit, because I think, George moving inside to a better position, the San Diego State transfer, and again, Harrison, his upside as a true sophomore. Very excited to see how these guys perform just as much as the passing game.
This is an offensive line that has some upside potential. Obviously, a unit that's got some different pieces plugging in. Is Crenshaw-Dixon going to be solid? What's he going to look like in his debut? Damian George. Where are they going to play him? Jake Slaughter, I think he's a solid center. This is a tough matchup. Again, this is a really strong defensive line here for Miami that they're coming against. Can they put together a sturdy and strong performance? I think they can have a decent day, but I do think Miami will find a way to get in the backfield, get a sack or 2 on Mertz, make him uncomfortable, get a couple tackles for loss in the backfield, because this is a unit that still is a little bit weaker than I would like for this Florida offensive line, plugging in a few different pieces here and there. I like what they have. I'm a little cautious about this game. Going to be tough to see how they adjust early on. Definitely going to keep my eye on that.
Now moving forward to the Miami defense. And, again, this is one of the nation's best defensive lines. They're going to be the catalyst for this team. But at times last year, they struggled against the run when they probably shouldn't have. And I think that's certainly something that needs to be pointed out. Against North Carolina, they got abused. Against Louisville, they certainly were less than ideal. Boston College and Rutgers late in the year had some yards on them running the ball. They were never really poor outside of those few occasions, and other times they were elite, like against Georgia Tech and A&M. They were phenomenal. Game they lost against GT. But, you start with Ruben Bain, a guy at defensive end who was just a tremendous breakout player, very good at rushing the passer, was good against the run. They get back Akeem Mesidor, who played 2 games last year. He was a phenomenal player, though, leading sack getter in 2022 for them. Picked up Tyler Barron. He's coming off the edge, a guy who transferred a few times this offseason. He got a nice, healthy payday there. And you look at some of the other players, Elijah Alston, he was elite in all regards. When it came to rushing the passer, mainly for Marshall last season, to reunite with his defensive coordinator. The rich get richer, Nick, and it starts with more transfers on the interior. C.J. Clark from NC State. I think this is a guy who has, a good ceiling. Simeon Barrow was a good run stopper for Michigan State. Marley Cook was a real standout for Middle Tennessee. So, this is an incredibly deep defensive line. They've got to be able to take over this game, Nick, and I think they're going to be a very strong unit throughout the season with incredible depth, especially off the edge.
Certainly an incredibly strong unit here. Ruben Bain returns, a really good player. Francisco Mawaga at middle linebacker is a really solid piece. They bring in Elijah Alston, C.J. Clark, Simeon Barrow, who are all incredible pieces that they bring in. This is a really strong unit that looks to be very physical here with a decent matchup against this Florida offensive line that I have some concerns about. Expect this unit to absolutely dominate, have a really strong day. Akeem Mesidor is a guy that didn't play a whole lot last year. He returns amped up. Ahmed Moten as well is a really solid player at nose tackle. This is a really deep unit with a bunch of guys that can rotate in and out. I really like what they have coming off the edge in Alston and Bain, who are really 2 strong pieces. Bain is a younger player who had some good reps last year. This is a very dominant unit who expects to have a really strong day despite being on the road.
And behind them might be the unit's best player, Francisco Mauigoa. He was the team's leading tackler, along with 18 TFL and 7.5 sacks. Absurd production from him. The rest of the unit you really think will take shape this year. Wesley Bethante, a player as a third-year Hurricane should certainly elevate his play. Jalen Alderman, he was one of the top 5 tacklers for Louisville last season in the middle. Raul Agori was a 4-star, played about 50 snaps last season. So I think this is a much improved room compared to last year for Miami. I think they can take some sizable leaps. They need to see physicality from the entire bunch, though, and this will be a great time to show it. Going on the road against the talented supporting cast, the run game, it's going to be hard for Florida to execute, but the linebackers will certainly have to play big in creating negative plays, especially when you get into the red zone. So I think that this is a linebacking group that can really make a statement in this game.
This is a very strong linebacking unit today. I think Mulago is a really incredible player that returns, the best player on this defense. The centerpiece here who looks to dominate, the top returning tackler from last year, 82 total tackles, 18 tackles for loss, 7.5 sacks, plus a pick and 3 pass breakups, stat sheet stuffer, do-it-all kind of guy that they return. Plus, I think Wesley Bissontaine as well, and then Raul Aguero Jr. as well as a solid piece. So this is a really deep linebacking core that's going to look to patrol the middle of the field. I expect Florida to have to throw the ball a whole lot, probably throw across the middle of some slant routes, crossing routes, things of that nature. I think if you can play strong press coverage and really look good in the middle there, this could be a strong day for Miami.
And Florida having a pass-heavy approach might play right into their favor, because this is a bit of a uninspiring secondary, at least for me. Dione Hill, a guy from Marshall, had 10 pass breakups last year, is a good transfer. Jadias Rashard didn't really have the emerging season last year to expect, but he's a veteran at this point. Darrell Porter is a good veteran for them at the other cornerback position, but these aren't exactly high-end talents. I think Michelle Powell is a good player for them. Coming over from Washington to fill in at the nickel. Safety's incredibly young. Jaden Harris and Markeith Williams, 2 redshirt sophomores, really haven't played. Isaiah Taylor, pretty good player from Arizona. And then they have a freshman behind them that might get on the field. A lot of inexperience here, Nick, especially when it comes to playing at this level of ball. Maybe for Powell, he'll be fine. Then Taylor at Arizona saw some tough opposition. And Hill at Marshall, though, probably not as much. I think this is an area where they can get exposed, Nick, putting more emphasis on the defensive line, showcasing a strong effort here, because I think with Mertz and the accuracy he showed last year, with now better weapons that can hurt you from just underneath or 40-yard route downfield, I think the consistency from the Florida passing attack might be something that really hurts Miami.
I think that's certainly a fair assessment, because you look at this secondary unit, it's definitely the weakest unit on this defense. I think Darrell Porter is not bad. Markeith Williams is not bad either. Misha Powell comes over. He's a decent player. Then Hill coming over from Marshall. He's a strong player at left corner. But overall, this is a unit I think is a little concerning for me. I don't know if I love this matchup. I think Mertz being extremely accurate and having nice weapons to disposal makes this a nice advantage for Florida. You could pick out your passes, pick out your man downfield. If you give Mertz time, as long as the offensive line holds up, he's extremely accurate. He's going to get the ball to those receivers. And with the way that their route running looks, some of the talent they have, this Miami secondary could be in for some trouble.
Now we look at the Florida Gator defense. Last year certainly had its struggles. They lose Princely Unimanellan, but this is a defensive line that they have certainly paid a lot of attention to. Cam Jackson, Joey Slackman, Caleb Banks, some real big bodies there that can help out against the run. Desmond Watson being another one. TJ Searcy, a true sophomore who should be very good this season. Tyreek Sapp, and of course the return of Justice Boone off the edge is going to be a notable addition there. Heavily revamped defensive line. That includes guys like Kelby Collins and Karen James. A lot of X4 stars in here, Nick. LJ McCray, a 5-star. He might even get on the field. This is a defensive line that's not being talked about enough, and for good reason. Pass rushing production at times wasn't always there. Against the run was certainly lackluster as well, because outside of Princely, nobody had more than 3 sacks. So this is a unit that certainly needs to up its play. With the added experience, though, I think you're going to see a collectively better approach from this D-line.
I think this is a D-line that's a really strong unit that returns enough pieces, adding some different pieces in. Justice Boone coming off the edge there. I like what they have there. Cam Jackson, a really solid piece. Joey Slackman, I think, was a really good add of the portal. Tyreek Sapp, I like his potential to step up. I think Justice Boone is in line for a really solid season this year. Caleb Banks is not a bad player at defensive tackle either. This is a decent unit here that I think has not a bad matchup. Underrated in the trenches, certainly.
Now you look at the middle of the defense, at linebacker, extra emphasis on the D-line being good, because this group last year was incredibly poor, especially when Shamar James was off the field. They were not very good. Miles Graham, 114th overall ranked recruit, with good athleticism, is likely to get on the field. He has good football IQ as well. Grayson Howard, a guy who comes over from South Carolina, who had a good amount of experience, was a pretty elite tackler for them, was a nice rotational piece. Just bad vision, and the inability to contain was just horrid for this linebacking group. James, though, Nick, a guy who has good closing speed, understands leverage in the run game. He's going to be important in this contest. Obviously, the addition of Ron Roberts as, co-defensive coordinator, I think is big in trying to help coach these guys up in the middle. So I think they'll certainly be better than what we saw at the end of last year, where injuries certainly played a factor in that. But even when James was playing against Kentucky, for example, they got absolutely smothered against the run, just taking bad angles, undisciplined football. That has to change in this game, or they're going to get absolutely demolished.
They're going to have to find a way to be disciplined in the middle of the defense. I think this is certainly a big test against a really strong Miami offense. Shamir James, he has to be better this year. He was the best player on this defense last year in terms of certainly, talent-wise. When he was hurt, this team was certainly struggling. He had 54 total tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack. He's a leader on this team. When he's not playing, this team certainly can feel that pain and feel that loss. He's got to be fully healthy this year, have to have a good game. Grayson Howard was a solid add. Miles Graham, a true freshman. Will he be involved early on? Derek Wingo, a senior, some more veteran. How much is Miles Graham going to play? He's a guy that they're high on. I want to see if he gets a run out here. This linebacker unit has to be better. I really wonder what type of rotation they're going to go with here, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on who's playing linebacker for this team throughout the game and how they fare.
Looking at a secondary that's 132nd and 30-plus yard passes allowed. Also 132nd interceptions of only 3. I mean, this just wasn't a good secondary. But I think they're going to be much better this year. Devin Moore, I think he's a very good player who has a lot of promise when he's healthy. Has been struggling in that area, though. Jason Marshall, a guy who hasn't exactly, lived up to, his billing, but he's still a good player. He showcases, abilities in run support, 10 pass breakups. He's a physical player. Did allow over 24 yards per catch last year. Only on a completion rating of 44%. So he didn't give up many catches, but when he did, it was for big yardage. I think him and, Marshall and Moore can be very good this season. Jordan Castell showcased the abilities to be an elite player last year, at safety as a true freshman. I think he's going to be a massive breakout player this season. You look at some of the other guys, though, that you can want to count on. Asa Turner from Washington, a very good player there. DJ Douglas from Tulane, a player they're going to lean on. A veteran in Traquez Bridges that might get on the field. So there's a lot of youth here in the secondary overall. I think there's abilities for them to be better, though. Jakeem Jackson was a high-ranked 4-star last year. Might get on the field as corner. So even though they're pretty poor last year in this regard, Nick, I think the expectations are going to be a lot better. And that's a lot of confidence I'm instilling in this unit, though. Do you concur?
This is a unit that has some solid pieces. I'm not as confident as you are, but I do think there are some pieces that are returning, some pieces that are added that could be good for this unit. Jordan Castell was really solid as a true freshman team, 60 total tackles, led the team in tackles, 3 picks for him. He's going to only get better as time goes on. Sharif Denson was also a true freshman. This is a very young unit last year. Asa Turner, they bring him in. He could be solid. Devin Moore, another decent piece they have returning. This secondary, I think they have a tough battle against some of the talented wide receivers in Cam Ward. I think there's going to be a lot of passing the ball here, a lot of throwing. Pass first, certainly from both teams due to the matchups they have. Both secondaries have a lot of points to prove.
Now, looking at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. Florida's going to get the edge at quarterback and secondary, but across the board, Miami's getting a lot of positives elsewhere. That doesn't mean the Gators are trailing by any means, because they still have a pretty good starting running back. Love the wide receiver group. Offensive line's a very serviceable unit. I think at defensive line, they have a lot of good size and a lot of upgraded talent there, along with rotation. They don't compare to the Canes, though, in some of these areas, Nick. Are these fair, or do you think that the Canes have an argument for a clean sweep across the board?
I think this is a fair matchup when you look at it. I think this is a fair way that you've kind of drawn this up. I think this is Graham Mertz is a more proven quarterback. He has a full year of SEC experience. Cam Ward has high upside, but hasn't played in the ACC, that is, and hasn't played for this program yet. While the secondary for Florida and Miami, I think are very close. Both are a bit weak units, but I think you can slightly give it to Florida. Maybe I'd give that to Miami. Miami definitely deserves the wins they have on that other side of the tail of the tape, because they are very strong in the trenches, very strong wide receiver. Although potentially you could maybe flip that to Florida if you're feeling risky enough based off what they have in the talent in that room.
Looking at the final thoughts in the prediction. The loser of this game, Nick, it's going to be a tough way to start the year. I mean, I couldn't think of being either of these coaches trying to explain what might happen the rest of the season if they lose this season opener. Mario Cristobal is going to be one answering the questions, Nick, because I have Florida winning this game. Keys to the contest, we'll start there. The D-line has to be nasty in all regards. Can the run game be overwhelming? That's the biggest question. I think that's going to be the thing that really excels for them, but I think you're going to see a pass-heavy approach. I think Restapro, is going to get a lot of targets. Cam Ward's going to have a low yards per attempt number. It's going to be hard for them to find much passing windows. Florida, got to be sturdy on your own interior D-line. I think they will. let Mertz cook with these weapons in a favorable matchup against a young and somewhat poor secondary I would project coming into this contest. I wouldn't exactly call it poor. Maybe that's a little disrespectful, but you know what I mean. It's not the same unit it was a season ago, especially with the losses at safety. And I think Mertz last year showcased great ability. And this Florida offense showed incredible resilience late in the year against LSU, Missouri. Whatever challenge was thrown at them, they seemed to, play pretty well. 23-20 final for me, Nick. This home environment is going to be incredibly rowdy, and I think Florida will prove to be the better football team, even though on paper they're probably a little bit weaker in certain areas. Gators will win this game.
I agree with you here. I have Florida winning this game by 4 points. I look back to the matchup in 2022 when Florida played Utah week 1, the number 17 and 7 team in the country. Utah traveled to the Swamp, and Florida ended up pulling off a massive upset with Anthony Richardson guiding them to that victory. Now, I don't think this team's as good as that team was in 2022, but that was a huge shockwave upset. That was a big chance. And Utah, they looked rattled the entire game. It's extremely tough to play in the Swamp. I've been to a game there. I saw Alabama and Florida play each other in 2021, and that was a very tough atmosphere, very loud atmosphere the entire day. Could barely hear myself think. Those fans get loud. That stadium is designed perfectly to keep the noise in. Incredible atmosphere. And when you play a top team like Miami is, a team that's a very talented team with high expectations in the ACC, an in-state rival, a historic rival, yeah, it's going to be very loud in there. It's going to be tough to deal with. I like what they have on offense. I think Mertz has nice weapons in a favorable matchup. The running back room worries me a little bit, but I think they'll be able to throw the ball plenty, whereas I think Miami does have a solid wide receiving room and a solid quarterback, but I think that the secondary edge is just a little bit there for Florida. Plus, I think Florida will find a way to get some nice opportunities with a strong defensive line, which Miami will do as well. This is going to be a close game, I think, back and forth, come down to the wire. I got Florida picking off the win in the end, and a huge statement win for Billy Napier because, he's got to get a win here. If this guy loses and this starts to fall apart, he could be fired by mid-October, early November with how tough the schedule is for Florida this year. This would be a big statement win. I think it would be, silence a lot of people that have concerns about the direction of Florida, and would also put a lot of doubt in the minds of people about Miami in the ACC. A lot of storylines could be written about this game after Saturday afternoon. When you come Sunday morning, when you start talking about it, or Monday morning, you start talking about it, there's a lot that can come out of this game. I'm very excited for this matchup between two in-state rivals.
Yep, couldn't have said it better. I think we've been saying it all offseason. It's a must-win for both teams, which is crazy to say because it's not even September yet, but it's more of a must-win for Billy Napier and Florida with what is a gauntlet of a schedule for the Gators. So I'm going to take them to win this game. I've also been saying that for months. I think they're going to win this contest. 3 points might not seem all that comfortable, but I think they'll be in pretty good control of this contest for 60 minutes. It's going to be it for today's episode. As always, Nick, appreciate you joining me. Great one here in Gainesville.
Looking forward to watching this incredible matchup to kick off week 1.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.